Okay. Well, good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you guys today. My name is Dr. Sarah Coburn. I'm the Assistant State Veterinarian and Manager of the Produce Food Safety Program for Alaska. I'm in the Department of Environmental Conservation, and we're in the Division of Environmental Health. And I always, at our office, we work with a wide variety of programs. We work with grade A dairies, we work with produce safety, zoonotic diseases, animal health issues, disease surveillance, and fish tissue monitoring. So I always like to bring up this concept of One Health and really thinking about how human health and animal health and environmental health are all interrelated. And I think we kind of know that, but sometimes it's nice to put that to words and to think about it, and then to more consciously think about how one area can affect another. And as gardeners, you know, there's obvious health benefits to that. I think we can all agree. And then within that bigger picture, it's good to think about what are the other things that are affecting my garden, what are the adjacent land uses, what else is going into it, like the soil amendments, the water that you're using, and what else is going into that could affect the safety of the final product. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just to give a little bit of context and point of reference for where our Alaska Produce Safety Program came about, there was a national federal regulation called the Food Safety Modernization Act that was put into place in 2011. And there's specific produce regulations that went into effect in 2015. And really what I want to say about this is that the whole act is focused on preventing foodborne illness instead of chasing it after it's already happened and people are sick and then just trying to go back and see what happened. From a scientific, evidence-based standpoint, what are the main causes of foodborne illness? What are the main sources? What are the main routes? And how can we prevent that before it ever gets to the point of making people sick? So really, we've been very fortunate to be able to apply a lot of the information and classes that we put together and resources and make them available. The regulations are specific to commercial farms, but it's the same concepts. It's the same routes, it's the same source. It's just that for a commercial farm, it's going to go to a whole lot more people than if it's our own home garden. So food safety is appropriate for everybody to think about, and especially with food that we're producing on our own small farms, our own home gardens, or even if it's a tabletop hydroponic unit in your house. So just as a point of reference too for foodborne illness related to different commodity groups, in this graph on the right, it's a little bit dated as far as the years, but it just gives kind of a good indication of why produce has been such a big focus in recent years. So you can see between produce, meat and poultry, dairy and eggs, and fish and shellfish, for that 20-year span that the graph is referencing, almost half of the foodborne illnesses were related to produce. And of course, we can all, we're all very well aware of romaine E. coli outbreaks in recent years. So this is something that we're aware of, it's in the news, and hopefully none of those direct big national outbreaks have affected us. But again, it's the same E. coli, salmonella, those same pathogens are present on our local farms or in our dirt and soil as well. So I'm excited to be able to share some of the ways that, knowing what we're trying to prevent, what are some of the ways that we can address it. So it's interesting too when you look at just kind of education of home cooks and home gardeners. You know, we've gotten to the point where I think most people are aware that you shouldn't thaw your turkey at room temperature, you know, for a week before Thanksgiving, or you should cook your chicken to 165 degrees. There's some things that over the past years, there's just been a lot of good information that's gotten out there, and it's just kind of gotten integrated into the general society and your average home cook. So interestingly, U.S. households numbers are pretty variable, and I would say for U.S. households growing their own, at least some portion of their own food, the statistics I could find were 35 to 40%. But then if you look at the past year, AeroGarden, those little small hydroponic units, their sales went up 30% at the start of the COVID outbreak. Burpee Seeds had the highest sales they've had in 144 years of being in business. last year, that quarter, January, February, March. So there's a lot of interest. I think even outside of a pandemic, a lot more people are interested in local food and knowing where your food comes from and buying locally, but also producing some food for yourself in your own garden. So lots of people growing their own food, but on the right side of the screen, you'll see some statistics about foodborne illnesses that are a result of food handling in the home. And the statistics are pretty variable. The lowest estimate I saw was 15%. A lot of them are more like 35 to 50% of foodborne illnesses are the result of food handling in the home. Not specific to produce, but just all categories. And it might be with meat or not handling some of those products appropriately. And some of that might be from produce as well. So 15 to 50% are the result of food handling in the home, but only 8% of consumers thought that foodborne illness was likely to occur at home. Our bias is to assume if we are sick and we think it's related to food, the bias is that it was someone else. That's usually the first. It was the restaurant you went to, it was the gas station you stopped at. So generally, there's just a little bit of disconnect between people recognizing that there are risks at home. So really my goal is to provide some tools to help you identify routes of contamination of garden fruits and vegetables, learn about some good general agriculture practices to prevent contamination, and then consider which ones make sense for you to implement at home. It's always, as with so many things, it's really a risk-benefit analysis. It's what's going to make sense for a big commercial farm is not going to make sense for me and my 20-foot by 10-foot garden at home. It just isn't. And we're handling things differently and the scale is different. But what things can we talk about today that might make sense? You might think, hey, that's an easy thing I can do at home and it's something that's going to decrease my risk and make the food that I grow at home safer for my family. And just like, we've learned, I think everybody's learned a little bit about epidemiology in the past year. For foodborne illnesses too, the most likely to have severe consequences are young children, elderly, immune compromised, and for a bacteria like Listeria, pregnant women are at a higher risk as well. So those are things you're going to take into account too when you decide what measures are appropriate for your home. Is if you do have young children that are working in the garden, if you have chickens too, and you have young children handling chickens and handling produce and helping you in the kitchen, then you're gonna maybe have some different practices than if you're a single adult living at home and you have more control over what's happening. So the main categories of contaminants for food, there's biological contaminants like viruses, bacteria, and parasites. We're going to talk a lot more about those. There's physical contaminants that are just things that might fall into the food, jewelry, earrings fall off, wood or metal. I have a picture. This was a restaurant I went to a couple of years ago with a nice moth. And the irony of that one was I was actually traveling for a food safety, produce safety conference and was out to dinner the night before the conference started, and the restaurant served me a salad with a big moth right in the middle of my spinach salad. So that's one example of a physical contaminant. And then chemical contaminants like herbicides or pesticides, sanitizers, lubricants, if there's equipment or things that are used with oil that's not intended for contact with food surfaces. So those are some examples of things that we might think about. Interestingly, a survey of vegetable gardeners a few years back, about 800 vegetable gardeners, and they definitely considered chemical contaminants to be of a much higher risk or a much higher concern. And there was really a general lack of knowledge of what bacterial components were there or biological components could be contributing. So they really were kind of focused on chemicals, which can happen, things can happen, mistakes can be made, but oftentimes those are recognized more directly, especially in a home environment where the bacteria or viruses may be not as at the forefront of what you're thinking about. So within that microbial category of pathogens, so there's lots of bacteria in the world, and a lot of it's good, a lot of it's just neutral as far as our own health, and then there's a small percentage that actually are pathogenic, meaning they can make us sick. So the big ones we think about, bacteria, and the ones that you might see in the news, E. coli, 0157H7, Salmonella, and Listeria. Those are the ones with the most potential for making people very ill, for having a larger scale outbreak. And bacteria they can multiply in a host, they can multiply in the environment. Some of them just are environmental contaminants, they're in the dirt. And they can rapidly, they can replicate outside of a host. So they can replicate, if there is contamination that happens, they can keep multiplying without a host. Viruses, on the other hand, they do need a host to replicate. So the virus, once contamination occurs, some viruses are pretty stable in the environment, and they can exist and could still cause a problem, but they can't replicate, they can't multiply. So viruses, typically, if there's a problem in foodborne illness, it's related to a person, it's related to a sick person handling food, shedding virus that's contaminating the produce. And then parasites. And parasites, especially up here in Alaska, mostly if you think of people that have had, or if you've had an unfortunate incident with it, Giardia or Cryptosporidia is often, backcountry or camping when you don't have good water supply, don't have good potentially hand washing hygiene capabilities. Cyclospora, that's another parasite that's, the outbreaks we've had in the US have mostly been from imported produce. And again, Cyclospora, that's a human parasite, and it's the fecal oral route. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, but it sounds gross, but it's how stuff gets onto our food that shouldn't be there, whether that's from animals or people. So Cyclospora really gets back to some hygiene issues where certain types of produce are being produced. So primarily, we're going to be talking about bacteria today, because for the home gardener, I think that's the most likely. Certainly, if you are sick, if you know you have norovirus, first of all, you're probably not going to feel like you want to be out in the garden working. But certainly, if you do have something like that yourself, you need to be really careful about how you handle the food to try and keep other people in your house from getting it. But the bacteria, there's a lot of just our common practices and environmental conditions that can lead to contamination. So on your farm, on your small farm or home garden, what are the potential sources of how bacteria could get onto the produce? And one big category is the people. And again, that's going to be, the risk of that's going to be variable depending on, if it's just you and you're the only one in the garden. Are you working with a community garden or a church garden where you've got lots of volunteers coming in and different people? In that case, you might want to set up something to have some standards for hand washing, have hand washing available. Soil amendments, the compost or aged manure you might put in there. We've got all sorts of ones in Alaska, beach peat in Southeast or in Kodiak, where they're getting some of the vegetation that washes up on the beach and composting that. The water supply, so lots of ways that we use water for irrigating and watering during the growing season. And then also if you're doing any rinsing or washing afterwards. Animals are another source. Animals, just like humans, can shed bacteria from their GI tract. So once again, how do we keep the poop off the produce? That's the goal. Harvest tools and containers, that's another, it's a food contact surface. So anything that the produce is in contact with in the garden or when you bring it into the house, those are all would be, or any knives you might be using, shovels you might be using in the garden, those are all other sources. So we'll talk a little bit about each of those categories in a little more detail. So of course, people work in the garden. And again, if it's a community garden, we've got some really, really amazing gardens in the Anchorage area with volunteers, or the refugee gardens are doing some really great work and producing food for the community. So in those situations where you've got a lot of people rotating through, like I said, you might want to make sure that you've got some access to a hand washing station, or at least it's known where the bathroom is and what the protocols are. Go wash your hands before you go into the garden. Any illnesses or injuries, just a good practice, it'd be required in a restaurant or for a commercial growing operation. But if somebody does get cut, if there's any blood, they need to go inside, wash. It's good to know where your first aid supplies are. It's good to wash and put clean up the wound, put a Band-Aid over it, and ideally put a glove or something over it. Certainly if somebody's sick and potentially could be shedding bacteria, they probably shouldn't be working in the garden, especially close to harvest where that produce is going to be eaten shortly after. And one thing I should mention too is the main concern we're talking about with produce is because fresh fruits and vegetables, great part about them, you can eat them raw and you don't need to cook them. So a lot of our, you know, berries and lettuces and spinach and things that we enjoy eating raw, if it's something that's going to be cooked, then we're less concerned about it, because with cooking and high heat, a lot of the bacteria of concern are going to be killed. So a lot of this really is more important with I mean, good practices apply regardless, but especially with a product that's going to be eaten without any further cooking step. So general hygiene, thinking about boots and clothing and you know, if you've got, I mean, even on our, you know, where I live, we bought a new property, we've got chickens, and we're looking at planting a garden this spring. So one thing you want to think about is where the people are traveling or moving, how they're moving about the property. It's a good idea to go work in the garden first. If you're not going to be changing boots or sanitizing your boots right away, go to the garden first. That's your cleanest area. Then go take care of your chickens or your goats or whatever other critters you've got. And have just generally having clean clothes and like I said, clean boots, or even consider having separate boots for the chickens and separate boots for the garden area, just so that you don't have the chance of bringing that manure directly into the gardening area. And hand washing. We've heard more about hand washing this past year than you've probably ever imagined, but nothing new for the food industry or restaurants, but definitely hand washing even at home is really important. So if you're you know, again, if you're working on other parts of the farm and then coming into the garden, washing your hands first, washing your hands before you're harvesting lettuces and bringing them into the house. And even in the kitchen as you're preparing, want to have nice clean hands before you're getting that salad ready to eat. Definitely wash your hands after going to the bathroom, after eating. And again, in that kind of risk assessment of different, if you've got running water, how you proceed or how you perceive your risks or what you can do on your farm might be a little different than if you've got a pit toilet or if you're a long distance away from running water in your regular house. Animals. So why are we concerned about animals? Because they can shed human pathogens like E. coli and Salmonella and Campylobacter. That's another one. So the animals we're thinking about, it could be wild animals, it could be domestic animals. Some common ones we hear about when we do classes here in Alaska, voles. Never realize how many voles are around, especially in the interior. We get a lot of questions about voles. Porcupines, that seems to be a little bit specific to the Southeast. Cranes or other birds, I mean, certainly cranes were just one I could think of that we have large numbers that travel through, but even smaller birds, I mean, they want to come in, they think those berries look pretty good too. So with the animals, well then, like I said, with domestic animals too, really want to focus on trying to keep them out of your specific garden area. There's different ways to do that. Sometimes fencing for a small operation, just having a fence, even just to keep neighborhood wandering cats out, and dogs, keeping them out, keeping any livestock on your operation out of the growing area. Birds can be a little bit trickier, but sometimes just having, I know a couple of farms where they actually plant some things a little further from their main garden, and they just say those are for the birds, and hopefully, you know, they put it up against the woods or somewhere where they feel comfortable going, and then they're less likely to come in to the garden. Some people use some deterrents or things like that, but probably for our small operations or our home gardens, one thing I think is most relevant is just being aware of your domestic animals on the farm, and making some accommodations to keep them out. And the other thing we think about with animals too is potential contamination of water sources. So if you do have some goats or you've got some chickens and you're composting that manure, make sure that manure pile is separate from your water source. So if you're using, if you're using some pond water or something to irrigate your garden and water your garden, think about where that manure pile is too, so that it's not uphill of your water source and draining right into it and potentially contaminating it. Or same thing with wild animals too. If you've got some migratory birds or if you've got some game trails, thinking about your water or your well for that matter too, and whether the presence of those animals might be impacting your water. And another really relevant topic for home gardeners is soil amendments. So those are anything that you're putting into that soil to help with the nutrient content. If you're adding some fertilizers, those are chemically treated. So those are not going to be, those are not going to be a concern from the standpoint of bacteria. But ones that are not processed, if you have a common point of confusion or just nomenclature is compost versus aged manure. And I grew up on a little small family farm with goats and a couple cows and a garden. And, we had a big pile of manure and litter and things, and we call it compost because it sat there for 2 years and then we'd mix it into the field. Technically, compost is a standardized, or composting is a standardized process where it's maintained at a certain heat for a certain amount of time to eliminate bacteria of concern and to weeds too, to kill weed seeds. So that's a controlled process versus aged manure would just be, hey, there's that stack that we've been piling up on for 2 years. It's been sitting there. It's basically degraded. And we want to put that back into the soil as that nutrient source. So it certainly, that's a great way to kind of recycle what's happening on your land. But the aged manure or untreated manure, certainly raw manure, can be a source of human and animal pathogens. So if it's not a controlled process, if the heat hasn't gotten to 131 for a minimum of 3 days, if it's really aerated in a controlled situation, more doable is 15 days over 131 degrees and turned at least 5 times. That can generally keep it hot enough to be effective. But typically speaking, we don't have the equipment or we don't have enough bulk even or warm enough temperatures to get it to the higher temperatures. So it doesn't mean that you can't use aged manure, but there's some accommodations you want to make for that. So wouldn't recommend adding that to your garden during the growing season. Typically would want to apply that in the late fall after you're done harvesting. If you do need to apply it in the spring, you want to make sure it's at least 2 weeks before planting. And the goal is to get 120 days between when you apply it and when you're going to harvest the product. So if it is in the spring, if you can get it before planting, hopefully that'll give you a long enough window so that you can feel confident about using it. And you want to thoroughly incorporate it into the soil. Side dressing's definitely not recommended where you're just putting manure right next to the row of your product. It's just too much potential for direct contact with the product. And you also want to consider potential harborage for rodents or other animals. So if you're going to all this trouble and you're really trying to get the pile hot enough to kill pathogens, but then if it's just sitting out there and you have, rodents moving in, or you've got other critters that are hanging out in there because it's a protected spot, you've kind of defeated the purpose of trying to get rid of some, you've gotten rid of some pathogens, but then you're introducing others from the rodents. So you want to think about all those things. And there's some really nice, even on Amazon or maybe your local garden store, just for $20 or so, you can get a compost thermometer. And again, even if you're not really equipped to get it up to official treatment standards, it's nice to know. We got one last summer for our compost. It's kind of nice to know how hot you're getting it and if you're getting enough oxygen in there and if you've got a good mix of things to keep the temperature up. But the compost thermometers, you can get them anywhere from about 16 inches to 20 to 24. If you get even the 24 is probably more like $50 to get those longer ones. But even that 16, 18 inch gives you an idea of kind of how you're doing if you're really getting some good bacterial action going. Excuse me. And again, keep coming back to the same concept of risk assessment. So there's lots of ways to go about doing things, but it's good to be educated about what you're dealing with. If you're going to buy compost from one of the commercial composters, there's going to be a lower risk of that product having a bacterial issue. If you're using vegetative matter that's composted or aged, that's going to be lower risk because there's no manure in it. We don't have any reason to think that the coal or the scraps from the tomato plants, there's no reason to think that those would be contaminated. So that's going to be a lower risk, and that could be handled maybe not as carefully. But as you get up into the aged manure, and then raw manure certainly would be at your highest risk category, and would want to use that really carefully. And it depends on what kind of crop you have too. If it's something growing low to the ground, that's more likely to be in contact with it, you would want to be extra careful. If you've got shade cloth down and drip irrigation, and any soil amendment's not going to be in contact in theory with the crop, that's going to be another layer of protection. And something else to think about with a manure pile too is, again, look at the flow through the operation. So if your driveway drives right past the manure pile, up to where the garden is there potential that you're tracking stuff on the wheels of the vehicle from the manure pile down to your garden? Can you rearrange it a little bit so that you just don't have the traffic, either people, foot traffic, or vehicle traffic that's dragging things down to your garden area? Your garden should be your clean area, if you will. And another big category is water. So same idea, what's going to be our most predictable water would be municipal water. So if you're in town, they're doing the water testing, they're treating the water, so there's a level of assurance that's very high that water is safe. The next category would be wells. A lot of people have wells and are using that groundwater. So if the well is functioning, if it was built well and functioning and maintained, and it's deep enough, there shouldn't be contamination from the surface, and it should be safe water. That being said, there's a lot of people may not do any water testing. It's not a bad idea to do a water test and just kind of see what your status is, even on a well, and do what we would, from the produce safety standpoint, we would do a coliform test, and that's just a general category. E. coli is one type of coliform, but so that coliform can give you an idea and make sure that your water is safe. The next category up as far as safety would be surface water. It's not contained, so if there's animals or birds or people, or there's just lots of ways that contamination could get in there. And it doesn't mean that you can't use any of those, but if you're using surface water, then you might want to think about, it's going to be safer if it's kind of a drip irrigation system versus overhead. If you're just watering with the water from your house and you're on a municipal system, then that's fine to go from the top where it's in direct contact with the product. And we do get a lot of questions. I will say too that this well up here on the top right, just a picture off the internet, but looks like, well, there's some pooling that's happening here, and that would not be ideal. Looks like, I don't know what's parked up here. So ideally your well should not have any pooling around it. If you've got a septic tank, your well should be separate from where the leach field is. I moved into a new house last fall, and they've got the chicken coop that they had is about 20 feet from the well. When I get chickens out there, I'm going to try and get a little bit further. And in theory, again, if your well is deep enough, you shouldn't have an issue with the surface contamination. But if there's anything that breaks, or there's any problem with the well, anything that you have at the surface could make its way into your well. So if you can just prevent that, keep the animals further away, keep it a little bit higher on the land so that things, built up around it so that water's not pooling right around it, you're going to improve your likelihood of not having a problem. We do get a lot of questions about rainwater catchment. That would be considered surface water. It's not in a contained system. It's not in a controlled system. Even if you have one of the tanks and you're just doing like roof catchment, and it's in a tank, and maybe you maintain your tank really well, but then you have to think about, well, what's on top of my roof, and do we have birds that sit up there? And so it's not a clean surface particularly. So again, rainwater is fine to use. It shouldn't be used for hand washing. It shouldn't be used for washing the produce after you're harvesting it. That should only be done with potable water. To use rainwater as irrigation during the growing season, yeah, that's probably fine. And you might even want to think about your containers too that you're catching it in. Do you ever clean those out or scrub them out? Do you have any algae or mold or things growing inside of that might be an issue as well? So consider that just another part of something you want to check and make sure that it's working well and that it's clean and sanitized as needed. So our other big category is surfaces and equipment and tools. And this could be everything from, I did put in the boots just because that's a kind of a piece of equipment that's going to be used around the farm. And like I said before, you want to start from the clean area and go into your dirtier areas, like where your animals might be. But really, surfaces, any food contact surface. So anywhere that the food is going to be, you might have some totes or something you're putting them in, or buckets. Those would be food contact surfaces. If you're gonna, do you have a picnic table out back? And that's where you usually kind of line stuff up when you're harvesting some of your product. So any of those surfaces, you want to think about how cleanable they are. If they're porous, they're going to be harder to clean. This table over here, the picnic table, wood really can't be cleaned and sanitized. Everything just soaks into it. But if you've got a picnic table like that and you've got kind of a bigger harvest day and you want to do some of your chopping and things outside, go to Fred Meyer and get a nice plastic tablecloth for $20 and put that over the top. So you've got a clean surface that you actually can wipe down. You can use some sanitizer on there to make sure that your surface is clean along the way. So look for the simple things that you can do. If you're using some buckets or totes, or a small bucket in the house or something like that, that's great. Clean it before you use it, and then store those things inside. If you use that bucket, bring it in the house, take the produce out, and then you put it back outside, we get back into, well, is there potential for rodents to get into it? Is it, do you have rainwater collecting in it? Do you have mud, or did it get cleaned out after you used it and it's got dirt in there? So just kind of managing your supplies. Shovels or things like that would be another type of tool. So again, if you have animals, if you've got pigs or chickens, horses, goats, any of those critters, if you have your garden, might be nice to just have a separate rake and a hoe and a shovel that's only used in the garden, and have separate equipment for the animals. If you're using the same equipment, you need to be really careful about how those are cleaned and sanitized. And I do want to bring up too that there is a difference between cleaning and sanitizing. Cleaning is the physical removal of dirt from a surface, which can include the use of clean water and detergent. Sanitizing is actually treating a clean surface to reduce or eliminate microorganisms. So a dilute bleach solution might be a sanitizer. But if you have something dirty, even looking at these boots, if they're dirty already, the sanitizer can't get through that debris and actually sanitize the surface. So the cleaning part's really important, the actual removal of dirt, the friction of a sponge, scrubbing off that dirt and other soil on there, scrubbing that surface first, and often really need that detergent or soap or dish soap to scrub it and break that material down. And then when you have that clean surface, you can sanitize it with a bleach solution or something similar. So think about that for your containers, or if you've got containers or equipment that you leave out all winter before you use them in the spring, it would be a good idea to do a cleaning and sanitizing process before you use them in the garden. So I want to mention grower training. So we went pretty quickly through our 5 categories. And again, we've got mainly worried about bacterial pathogens like E. coli or Salmonella and those sources of how that can get there. That's people, animals, through the soil amendments we put into the garden, water, and through our harvest tools or containers and other food surfaces, food contact surfaces. So we have a grower training that we provide to mainly to commercial growers or folks selling at farmers markets, but we've had a lot of home gardeners come as well. It's a standard curriculum through Cornell University, and it's a full day, 8-hour. When we're able to do it in person again, it's a full 8-hour day. Right now we're doing remote trainings that are split into 2 days. So it's about 4 hours. Well, it's a little bit longer because things take longer online, but 5 to 6 hours each day for 2 days. We really go into each one of those things that we covered, for 5 minutes, goes into a lot more detail, and then it gets into the specifics of the federal regulation as well, but it goes into a lot of good agriculture practices. So if that's something, we've been really, really pleased with participation the last 3 years. We've had 275 participants, 21 trainings. We have 2 more scheduled, and there's no charge, and every grower is welcome to come. We've had very good response. It's geared towards a little bit bigger operations, but if you're growing and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to sell at the farmer's market at some point, or I would say community gardens too, it's really good. Even if there's no specific regulations that apply to them, it's really good to know kind of what concerns you might have and just learn some simple tips that they could implement to make sure that the food that those wonderful gardens are producing is safe. So we've got 2 coming up, and we would love for folks to sign up, or you can contact me for more information. The first one is March 30th and 31st, and registration closes on March 19th, and there is a link there. And then April 21st and 22nd from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. each of those days, and the registration for that closes April 12th. We provide a manual, which is a great resource in and of itself. If it's important to you to have a certificate, if that's something that might be helpful if you are looking to grow or look at some commercial sales, that's available as well. So we would love to have people sign up for that. Both of these are virtual. In the past, they've only been able to be offered in person because for the farms that are required to have someone attend, that's a way to verify their participation and that they're meeting the requirement. During COVID, we've been authorized to do these remote trainings, and we'll see. I'm not sure how long that will last, but at least a little bit longer. So if that's of interest, and particularly if the remote format works for you better, we would really love to have you join us. So there's lots of great resources out there. If you're looking for more information, I wasn't able to get specific website information, but all of these would be easy to find. So our office, the Office of the State Veterinarian, FDA, if you want more information about kind of the specifics of the regulation, or if you are doing some commercial sales and you're wondering how you fit into that, you can check their flow chart on the produce safety rule. Cooperative Extension, they're awesome. So find your regional person. They've got a lot of expertise on composting and growing, and they've got a lot more technical expertise on specific growing conditions for different crops and storage and maintaining the quality of the product too, if you're keeping it longer. Generally with the home garden, the fun of it is having it readily available, and I've not done any storage of ours, that's for sure. The Produce Safety Alliance, this is through Cornell. They have a ton of information, and back to cleaning and sanitizing, if you're interested in different sanitizers that are out there, either for food contact surfaces or for washing produce, they have a whole spreadsheet of a lot of information with different sanitizers and what their labeled uses for, basically what it's appropriate to use it for, and which ones were organic, and a lot of information. So that's one that we go to a lot. They also have just a lot of other fact sheets about the produce safety rule and good agriculture practices. DEC, food safety and sanitation, if you're looking to get beyond the home gardening standpoint and into more production or cottage foods, that they would be the ones. DEC, there's also information for private well owners that's would be helpful as well. And then your regional soil and water conservation districts, they've actually gotten really ramped up in the last few years with working with local producers on water testing and soil quality. They've just really, like I said, just really stepped up, and they're providing a lot of good information to people. So that is another option. And then USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, they've in the past have done a lot with hoop houses and for a little bit larger scale growing in our state, but lots of good resources in the state and through these regional offices to take advantage of. So in summary, food safety is important for everyone. There's huge benefits to a home garden. This is my daughter last summer with the first kohlrabi that we've grown before and the first one she got to pick. So just the joy of that and of sharing that with your neighbors or friends that someday post-COVID get to come over for dinner. So we all know those benefits, and we're you're learning all the other things about which types of vegetables grow well in your garden. So there's all those pieces, but then think about the other piece of how to also have a safe food product and take actions to reduce the risks. Make sure hand washing is available. If you've got children, you're watching those kids and helping them to make sure that they're doing safe practices. And utilize the resources that are available to learn more. Here's our website, and there's lots of information from animal health, but specific to the produce program as well. And our upcoming trainings and things will be available there, and any new newsletters that we have available will be on the website. So hopefully that gave you a few things to think about and maybe a couple of ideas for things to do on your own farm. And at any point, if you have questions, Dina Kalaji is also involved with the produce safety program. She's a program coordinator and a microbiologist by training. So she's got a lot of good information. So contact either one of us by phone or email. And then again, there's the website link for the Office of the State Veterinarian. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for teaching that class for all of our customers. I know it was a lot of great information. Again, they do have their email addresses listed there, so they are a great source to reach out to. We did record this class, so we're going to be sending it out via YouTube or with a YouTube link to all of the customers that did register. So you will have this recording to reference later on. But thank you so much again for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.